And just before we start this morning, this session, which is going to be extremely interesting, can I get an idea of how many people think they might make the social this evening? Because we need to book a table at the Greek Taverna, which is in Woburn Place, so very nearby. Any ideas? Could you put your hands up for those people who might be able to come? And somebody, I hope, is taking note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay? Shall we do it again? Any more to go to the social this evening? There's room for 40. Fewer hands this time. Okay, I think we've got an idea. Thank you very much. And now I'm very happy to welcome Mary O'Hara, who is a writer on The Guardian and Observer, among other things she does, and who's written a book called Austerity Bites. And I think she's going to give us a little glimpse of some of the stories that she heard on her travels around Britain to speak to people about that. So welcome, Mary. Over to you.
Hi. Hi, everyone. So I'm trying to operate 2 bits of technology here, so bear with me a second. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, great. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me today. I'm very happy to be here. There are a lot of knowledgeable people in this room, so it makes me worry a bit about telling you things you already know. But if there's one thing I've learned in the last 3 years, as I've been researching and writing about austerity, it's this. I believe it is beholden on any of us who want to highlight the devastation it is wreaking to say over and over just what austerity really entails. I'm going to talk a bit about my book, Austerity Bites, and how it came about. So my focus is very much on the UK. That said, the relationship between austerity, poverty and health are a global phenomena, and whether discussing Britain, South America or somewhere else around the globe, it's clear that we need to examine the fallout of it. I hope that by talking to you a bit today about the human fallout that I've encountered from austerity in the UK, that some of the wider lessons to take away from this experience are touched upon. I spoke to a lot of people as I travelled the country, and they told me all kinds of things about what they'd been experiencing and what had happened to them. So before I say anything else, I'd like you to sort of listen to a short piece of audio from some people I interviewed in Newhaven in Sussex. These are a bunch of homeless young people, teenagers, who talk a bit about the fallout of the recession, about austerity, and about what their lives have been like during this particular period in British history.
It does make it more difficult finding new work, because people always looking for people with experience, so it makes it more difficult, whereas 10 years ago, say, there were much more jobs, so people wouldn't so much need the experience, they'd be gaining it through work that they're doing.
You need experience to get the job, but you need the job to get the experience, and it just keeps going. Some of my friends have got a job and they get a lot less hours than they were supposed to, and they need the money to live, really.
It's like somewhere where you go when you're between 16 and 25 and you're homeless, and it's like 170 odd quid for your rent per week, unless you're on benefits, and then you only have to pay £7 a week. But to pay that and your food, you have to get a job with enough hours. And then, it's like not happening, because you can't pay that.
I think you don't understand the severity of the situation until you're in the situation. Currently, I'd say I'm homeless, but I can't get a job because I don't have any experience, so I can't get the money to be able to live somewhere. Because of that, I don't eat very well unless someone else is paying for me to be able to eat. For example, politicians may not have lived in that environment at any point. They may not have been out to experience that situation. so they may not understand it as much as someone who is in that situation. So you can say to someone as much as you like, well, this is what's happening, but you have to be there to fully understand it. Just talking to people about it doesn't really solve it. You kind of have to go out and do it. You have to try and sort it out for yourself. And you can talk to people about your problems, about stuff that's going on, but it's when you actually go out there and engage it that something happens about it.
I pretty much apply to anything I can within the area that I can get to, because I put a CV up on a CV website where they get back to me, and I asked a part-time job and they give me one in Shoreham, which is like 2 buses and it starts at like ridiculous o'clock, so I can't take it. And then like literally I'm just surviving off of a paper round at the moment. That's literally it. And I get paid £11 a week for that. I've been job searching for a good 2-3 years now. I've had 2 interviews and neither of them got back to me.
Everyone says go and do volunteer work, but you can't go and do volunteer work necessarily because it's not going to feed you.
You can imagine as a youth worker supporting these guys with just brick walls. Everywhere you go, you get a brick wall. And we do partnership working. We're a big organisation. We know our stuff. These guys have been with us for a long time, good few years, and it's just brick wall, brick wall. And your local authorities are supposed to be there to support and look after you, as if you up and move to somewhere else, they can't entertain you because you've got to have been there for so many months.
But how are you supposed to pay to move? How long did it take me to get into my housing?
You can't even travel.
Like, how long is it going to take to get into other housing?
And it's the mental health, it's just that spiral. It really, really is, and it's so frustrating.
On a bitterly cold day in the winter of 2013, I was sitting with a group of women from the Croxteth area of Liverpool. In no uncertain terms, they told me of the harm the government's austerity programme was doing to people across their community. As far as I'm concerned, if you have to go to a church and ask for food, it's like going back to Victorian times. One woman, Debbie, declared about the surge in demand for food banks that was sweeping the country. It's begging for food, and it's not just people on benefits who are struggling, it's people who are working. Debbie and the other women she was with were adamant that the views of people hit hard by austerity, especially in parts of the country already beleaguered by recessions recent and past, were heard. They talked about the poverty-inducing low-wage culture and zero-hour contracts and the lack of full-time, secure, well-paid jobs. They talked too about the bedroom tax, caps and cuts to social security benefits, and the extremely damaging and increasing use of punitive sanctions for people on benefits. And they wouldn't let me forget about the constant, accompanying and extremely potent political refrain that people in need of any assistance from social security were faced with, namely that they're scroungers. Always the threat of poverty and its myriad consequences loomed large. There were concerns about the impact not just on physical health from lack of good or enough food, but also on the mental health of individuals struggling to cope on less money and with fewer vital public services. Worries about the resilience of their communities as more people were forced to heat or eat also featured prominently. There was a clear view too that politicians of all hues were either failing to understand the true impact of austerity policies or they were willfully ignoring them. There was a belief that Westminster was woefully out of touch with the average citizen's life. The Croxteth women were angry and they were also fearful. That anger and fear was replicated everywhere I went across the country during 2012 and 2013 when I was asked by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to travel all over the UK and interview people at a grassroots level about the effects of austerity and government cuts in real time and as the policies were being implemented. This is how another woman, Anne from Newcastle, who was struggling to find a place to live after fleeing a violent partner, summed up her take on the rapidly altering political, social and economic landscape. They live in a bubble, she said, all of them. She's talking about the politicians in Westminster. They all sit down there in the House of Commons with their subsidised food and drink, yet people like me can't get emergency crisis payments. The mental strain is unbearable at times. Now I have to rely on food parcels. It's miserable. It's a hideous existence. It's not worth living. And this is going to get much worse. For disabled people, who were among the worst affected, and often by multiple cuts at once, the sense of despair and fury was often palpable. Talking about the combination of reforms to disability benefits, including the controversial work capability assessment and the abolition of the Independent Living Fund, one young disabled woman, Amy, described what many people told me they felt. I really believe government policy is about ideology. They say it's about austerity, but that doesn't make sense to me. People don't seem to understand the difference disability benefits make to someone's quality of life. People think benefits are easy to get, as if it's all people defrauding the system. Well, they have never been easy to get. I have always had to fight for every scrap of help. The more locations I've visited and reported from, 18 in all across the UK over 12 months, ranging from inner city London to the Northumbrian countryside and the Welsh valleys, the more it became apparent that this was no ordinary time. As you all know, the economy was struggling to bounce back from an extraordinary economic catastrophe brought about by failures within the international banking system, which was followed by an enduring slump, or Great Recession as many commentators have referred to it. In the aftermath, some of the most marginalised people in society, including disabled people and lone parents, were grappling with the fact that they were on the front line of the government's decision to implement a brand of austerity centred around savagely cutting public spending. Now, statistics can be bewilderingly opaque, but even people who generally didn't follow politics that closely were telling me that they were aware that slashing billions from the public purse was going to leave serious scars. Meanwhile, every chance they got, ministers would promulgate about tough choices and the necessity of austerity and of cutting the welfare bill, as if that was the blame for the economic crisis. It wasn't. As I travelled, reports were piling up about how the poor and vulnerable stood to be disproportionately affected by austerity. This, from the New Economics Foundation's report, Everyday Insecurity, was typical. It concluded, the burden of reducing Britain's deficit is falling predominantly on people who get vital support from public services and welfare, the unemployed, low-income earners, the very elderly and the young, and perhaps most of all, disabled people. Throughout 2012 and 2013, as I was travelling the country, charities and activists were scrambling to critique and resist the cuts, and what would turn out to be one of the most fundamental shake-ups of the welfare state since its inception. Local government budgets were slashed, and it was made clear that billions more were in the pipeline for years to come. Policies were being rolled out so quickly and were so complex and wide-ranging, it was difficult for anyone to keep track of their individual, never mind cumulative impact, be it on household finances or on health. It was against this backdrop that I began the original commissioned project by JRF. It needs to be noted that I wasn't researching as an academic would. I'm a journalist, and I observed, inquired and reported as such. I reported on what I found every few weeks, with audio, video and written work appearing online. You can find much more of that on the JRF website. Austerity Bites, the book, emerged from these original reports because I felt the reportage I was conducting warranted further analysis and contextualisation, not least because of the unprecedented nature of what was occurring. And I was lucky that Policy Press wanted to publish the book so I could bring all this material to bear. The central thrust of the work was to bring into the public domain the voices and views of those at the sharp end. Also, the fact that the rapidity with which various austerity policies were being rolled out required a different kind of approach to try to understand it. I interviewed people directly affected by austerity, but also many people within community organisations and others who were trying to help them cope with the fallout, ranging from debt counsellors to employment advisors. From the interviews I conducted, some one-on-one, but many with groups and often for hours at a time, I built up a body of first-hand accounts about the impact of various policies. Distinct and overriding themes emerged that included fear, insecurity, stress, hunger, debt, bafflement that the taxes for the well-off were being cut while benefits were being slashed, as many studies have also shown, and a rising unease about the accelerating gap between rich and poor. There were also concerns within the voluntary sector that organisations were being increasingly overstretched because they were having to pick up the pieces where the state was no longer providing a safety net. Most of the people I spoke with weren't those going to anti-austerity marches when they happened, or campaigners or policy makers. They were individuals, families and groups silently surviving as they tried to cope with one cut after another and a relentless cycle of welfare changes. They were crying out to have their voices heard and to have their experiences recorded in some way. This is summed up in what one person during a group interview in Northern Ireland told me. She said, "I hope whoever in power reads this or hears what we have to say is really listening, because this is people's lives we're talking about." what has astonished me is the degree to which, since conducting the initial research in 2012 and 2013 and writing the book, is that everything I recorded is as relevant today as it was at the beginning. If anything, the fact that the deficit reduction which was used to justify austerity in the first place hasn't happened. In October it was confirmed to be even higher, due in part to decreased tax receipts because the recovery hasn't generated high-paid jobs, endorses the view of people bearing the brunt, but also the view of many leading economists that the austerity project was one enormous folly. Early this week, the International Monetary Fund effectively admitted that the introduction of austerity in 2010 was a mistake. And let's not forget that in 2013, their chief economist warned George Osborne that they were cutting too much. And that's the IMF, who normally is a cheerleader for austerity. I would suggest that anybody who wants to know more about that particular thing read Simon Wren-Lewis's blog, because he's done a great piece of work on what this all means. It remains to be seen how the coming months and years will pan out. A lot rests on which party is in government, but what appears to be being made clear in the run-up to the 2015 general election, if all the parties are true to their word, is that the UK is set for billions of pounds worth more of additional cuts until at least 2018, and this despite the public opposition and even the IMF's mea culpa. That these new cuts, many of which will be in social care and other local authority-funded services with potentially profound health impacts, will most detrimentally affect people who are the poorest or on modest incomes or who are old or disabled, because remember, these are the citizens who rely most on public services to help them get by. In the meantime, we have the incredible day-to-day humiliation of people going through the chaotic and brutal back-to-work schemes that are part and parcel of the wider narrative around austerity, namely the labelling and shunning of millions of people. Jill, have I got time for this audio clip? I've got one more audio clip that I would like you to listen to. And this is a guy called Craig, who's 40 years old, has worked his whole life, worked his way up as an engineer to a team leader at a smelting plant in the north of England. And him and his 400 colleagues were made redundant instantly and thrust into an economy that did not have the kinds of jobs that they were used to replace it.
Craig Thompson, live in Ellington, Northumberland, now a caravan engineer stroke tour bar fitter. I worked at Alcan, I was there 15 years. I started off as a production operator and worked up to a team leader. I was team leader for about the last 8 years. To be fair, at Alcan they did a lot of training, especially on the team leader side of it, management, put me through a lot of courses. I was made redundant at the end of May this year. 31st of May was my last day. I researched different avenues and I came up with the one that I've went with, which I thought there was a gap for that in this area. After doing my research and finding I couldn't find any more caravan engineers within a certain radius. It's been slow, to be honest, but I was expecting that for the time of the year, for the sort of work I do. I'm expecting it picking up come February for the start of the next season for the caravanners, and also fitting the tour bars. Obviously everybody with a caravan needs a tour bar, so it sort of interlinks. Obviously I looked at all our jobs and it was a well paid job that I had, and to find a job in this area with that money, they're just non-existent, to be fair. And that is the odd job with good, well paid, but that's just literally thousands of applicants for every job. It's a massive impact. I mean, an employer of that size, it's not just the employees there, it's all the other businesses that feed off it. It affects thousands and thousands of people in this area. You've got your engineering companies that were based in there, the contractors that was based there. There's literally thousands of people. The impact's huge. I mean, obviously I speak to lads I work with, and there's a lot of them haven't got jobs and they're getting real down about it. Getting really down about it. Because the prospects up here, there's just nothing. I signed off. I had never been unemployed before, so I didn't know anything about the job centre or anything like that, and it's absolutely soul destroying when you go there. They make you feel like rubbish, really. And so even before I was set up, they're saying, what you done this, where's your proof for this, where's your proof for that? And they knew I was doing courses to set a business up, but they still wanted to know, what jobs have you applied for? So, well, I haven't applied for any, I'm training. And, oh, well, we'll take your money off you and stuff. So I just says, right, that's enough, and I just signed off. I got no help off them. Speaking to friends of mine who I work with, that they're really at the end of that tether with a job centre, the way they've been treated. They've been promised courses and promised money to start different ventures, and nothing's come of it. Speaking to lads who's applying for dozens of jobs every week and getting nothing, and they're good lads and they're wanting to work. That's just nothing for them. And I think there's a stigma with being unemployed, and these lads, they're all workers. They've all lost the job through no fault of their own, and they're sort of getting put into that class of people where they're not.
The people I interviewed, and I continue to regularly report on austerity through my journalism, consistently comment on two things they hope for. One is an end to austerity, and the other is the demise of the political rhetoric that reinforces the vilification of people who are in receipt of social security or who need, like Craig, temporary help to get back on their feet. Rising inequality, deleterious impacts of multiple cuts on physical and mental health, rising suicides, the unprecedented growth of food banks and food poverty, and among the most cruel consequences of all, more children being thrust into poverty, are the new normal under austerity. The most terrible thing, however, is that this needn't have happened at all. Debbie in Croxteth sums up what I found time and again as I spoke with people. She says, if Mr. Cameron thinks he's getting away with this, he's got another thing coming. It may take people to hit rock bottom, but we'll fight him. We can't constantly let him do that to us. We're good people. None of us is lazy. If he thinks he's getting away with it, he's not. End of. Thanks.
I think that was a very interesting example of the suggestion that was made at the end of the last session of getting stories from people and then making the points for political, to try and influence politics. So thank you very much to Mary. She'll be back for discussion. Now we have Thomas Gebauer, who we're very happy to have. He is the Executive Director of Medico International, a Frankfurt-based organization. He was a co-founder of the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, and he's going to talk to us about influencing politics through health and medicine.
Just this way, yeah, forward. Is this one forward?
Oh, good.
Double. Let's click on
This double
go
click?
this one.
Oh, this one. Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to talk about the interface between politics and medicine. When David asked me to come to London, I was very happy to do that. He mentioned that Medico is a sister organization of Medact, and that's very happy to hear. We are very happy to hear that. And perhaps you will get a feeling of what does it mean to work together across borders at the end of my presentation. This is what I would like to talk about. Let me first of all say to you that I was a bit surprised when I read the title of my presentation in the written agenda, Influencing Politics Through Medicine. I turned it around. There's a good reason. I'm a psychologist by profession. I can really, I would appreciate if some of the politicians would search for psychological assistance. They are not doing it. And this is the reason why we still have to struggle for a different politics, to make improvement in health necessary, possible. Good. And this is the starting point of all our considerations at Medico. We are very much influenced by Rudolf Virchow, a German doctor and politician. I'm sure you have heard about him. He's one of the founders of social medicine in the 19th century. And he said medicine is a social science and politics is nothing else than but medicine on a large scale. He said this when he came back from a field trip to the northeastern part of Germany, where he was officially sent to investigate the outbreak of an epidemic typhus. Virchow didn't blame the disease, but the then ruling authorities that had worked for the interests of the political and the powerful elite only. If you read his report today, you can see the old one, perhaps it's a library in this institute here, you will find a lot of similarities to the present Ebola crisis. And these similarities are by no way coincidental. Following Virchow's statement, Medico struggles for the human right to the best possible access to good health. Primarily in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, we support local initiatives in their endeavors to create the economic, social, and cultural conditions which allow people to shape a decent, a healthy life. On the one hand, there is the social medical approach, some kind of assistance we are providing, aid. In this context, we are providing our partners with funds, with relief goods, and sometimes with knowledge, always with the intention to directly resolve existing health problems. This practical support may range from assistance in emergencies up to long-term cooperation in order to strengthen, for instance, health systems, to support the social, the psychosocial work with victims of torture, or to legally assist textile workers, for instance. Right now we have about 100 projects and programs in about 25 countries. I have got an annual report. This is in English, only a few copies, but if you would like to have more information on that, you can have a look at this. This is the one part. The other is the political approach, is what we are trying to pushing for political change. We are doing this by scandalizing the sick-making conditions people are forced to live in, by developing concepts and strategies for alternatives, and by supporting social movements and health activists in their resistance. So this is the advocacy part or the campaigning part. We are quite happy at Medico to have these both legs. I would like to explain it to you because it's, of course, interrelated, and it's giving us a bit more credibility. We are not just criticizing, we are also being active in helping people. And our partners, who are partners of the People's Health Movement, are very happy to get this assistance. At the same time, they are criticizing and challenging their governments. Bringing these two legs together is providing us a bit more credibility. We are not just pushed away as people who are criticizing and doing nothing. This is very important. It's a good starting point for us. But at the same time, we have to criticize aid. Of course, we know that the world doesn't suffer from too little aid, but from circumstances that make steadily more aid necessary. We heard that this morning. And politics and aid are mutual interact. To assist people in need is an ethical principle, of course. But as aid, in most cases, is only able to mitigate the misery or the poverty. It also contributes to stabilizing those conditions that are producing misery and poverty. This is the reason why we try to have a different approach. We are defending, criticizing, and trying to overcome aid at the same moment. Sounds a bit difficult, but it's possible. Let me just explain. Of course, it's necessary to defend assistance in a world, and this was perfectly presented by Ron Labonte, where the idea of solidarity is steadily replaced by the idea of self-responsibility. Everybody, everyone, each person is self-responsible. We have to defend the impetus of empathy and compassion, which is the basic fundamentals of solidarity, and we have to defend it against egoism, which is the prevailing ideology of neoliberalism. And this is precisely describing a bit the problem why we are so weak. This is the neoliberalism is among ourselves to some extent. Hegemony is not just but about a powerful elite which is forcing others. It has impact on the thinking, the conscious, the awareness of the people themselves. This is the problem. So we have to criticize aid, because governments can even better afford to care people if charity organizations and other private actors take over. We have to overcome aid. This is the only way to make the right to health necessary. Rights, human rights, come along with societal duties. They require public institutions bound to legal entitlements and obligations. From a charity organization, people can never claim entitlements. They can only ask for assistance. And this is the difference. Human rights are bound to make a claim. So defending, criticizing, overcoming aid at the same time, this sounds difficult, but people do understand. At least we made this experience in Germany, and we have to be realistic. That's what I'm always telling people. Sustainable change will not come with just aid or a few technical or pragmatic adjustments. Not a bit reform is the way to get the change. We have to go beyond pragmatism. And this is the place where I'm always quoting Albert Einstein, another well-known person. And he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. He perfectly describes why engaging for social change has to go beyond pragmatism. But what does it mean, going beyond pragmatism? What does the new thinking look like? Most likely we will not find the answer right ahead. Most likely we will find it only by pushing for it. But we can already outline some fundamental principles that guide our search for alternatives. Then this is the fundamental principles that guide our work at Medico. First, we have a political notion of human rights. This is quite important because a lot of politicians, they refer positively to human rights but perceive them as a natural quality. Everybody is self-responsible. He has a right, but he or she is self-responsible to make this right happen. This is bullshit. Human rights are always bound to societies. And this is what Hannah Arendt pointed out when she said the most important right is the right to have rights, to be part of a society which is the only entity which is able to realize the rights for every single person. Only as part of societies, human beings can mutually realize their rights. Second, the idea of a world citizenship based on a global constitution. Yes, there is a drive towards a global constitution. Ron Labonte spoke about the free trade agreements, TTIP and the others. They are all dealing with globalizing the reality, but only on the economic side. Why we are not trying to go for a globalizing in the social contract, or what is called a global constitution? We have a provisional one. This is a Declaration of the Human Rights, but to work on this is what we should do. Third, of course, the third principle, the democratic constitution of both societies and public services at all levels. Fourth, the transformation of the profit-oriented economy into economic activities oriented at needs and sustainability. Bringing all these principles together claims for the creation of an alternative to the existing imperial way of life. And I'm again back to our own attitudes, our own behaviors. Yeah? We have to change our own way of life. It's not just leaving out some meat, but sometimes it's part of it. Yeah? But it's trying to establish a different way of life, of consumption among ourselves. And this is what we try to start in our own organization. Why not trying to do it there? So of course, we are well aware that governance, and all organizations require governance, comes along with rules and austerity. That's also the case with NGOs, such as Medico. We are well aware about the constraints of our societies, but we are trying the best to handle them in a different way. The Medico is a registered non-profit and truly independent organization. There is no church, no party, and no other actor in the back. The formal membership is very small. It's about 80 members. They provide the legal frame, and their job is to elect the 6 board members, and this board is unpaid. Its members serve as an umbrella for the office, as a kind of supervisory structure. Just to explain you the difference to a Medact, we are not a member organization. We are an organization which is just trying to protect the office, yeah? The work the office is doing. Most of the decision making is done by the office, and we have about 40 staff members, 3 departments. It's very similar to all other organizations. Programs, projects, public relation and campaigning. I should say advocacy. Public relation is a little bit it's a bad notion, but it's a strange translation. Good, and of course administration. The 3 heads of these departments, together with me, we form an executive committee, and its main task is to coordinate and facilitate the internal procedures. Yes, we have a hierarchy. I, for instance, have a veto power, but since I was appointed as executive director in 1969, I never used it. It was never necessary to do that, because we tried to establish a kind of different decision making. Democratic governance starts with participation, of course, and it starts with participation in discussing, defining, and deciding on the budget of an organization. That's the most important. It requires transparency, and even more important, to keep the internal political debate alive. And this is the reason why we established across to the departments these working groups to the most important issues of our activities. And this is providing everybody of the staff the chance to be part of this discussion. Although the people from the administration are part of discussing global health issues in this case. You can imagine that this takes a bit more time. If I'm sure if we would invite McKinsey people and they ask them to do an assessment of our internal procedures, they would fall in despair. But as democracy is about conflict, any kind of participatory decision making needs time. It needs time. You need this time. Quite a few civil society actors that struggle for social change fail because they do not have a proper understanding of strategy. Some may have ambitious plans, but are missing the means or the right analysis of a political environment. Others have a perfect analysis, but no idea what to do. For Medico, and I heard it this morning from Medact as well, strategy is crucial. We perceive strategy as the effort to interrelate our goals with available means and the world outside. I've already spoken about the goals, and all of us, we know about the limitations that come with the world outside. We have heard a lot from Ron outside. So let's talk about strategic means that are needed to push the limitations back. The most important means are what our partners do. The projects, the programs, or what we are doing, the campaigns. They have to be convincing. We will get change only if there is desire for change. If people don't want to have change, there will no change. That's very simple. Huh? So our programs have to be convincing, and convincing requires that they allow both to scandalize unacceptable conditions of life and to outlining alternatives. These are most important principles of programs. The second is the networking with partners, nationally, internationally, and I will come back to this later. And of course, we need to have resources, financial resources, that guarantee a maximum of independence. Medico's annual budget is about 10 million euro a year. Half of it comes from private donations, the other half from grants for specific programs from the state, from the Ministry of Cooperation, Foreign Office, or the European Commission. That sounds a lot, but we pay a lot of attention that governmental grants do not create any kind of dependency. We are discussing every single grant with our partners. Are you willing to accept this? Are we able to do it? And only on that discussion we are able to decide on it. If Medico, for what reason ever, would have to refrain from all the grants tomorrow, the organization would survive, no problem. But to be honest, raising money from private donations is difficult as well. Oh, you reduced my time. Good. I thought I had 30 minutes, you said? I can. Good. I have to check. Huh? Good. I leave this out. Today, Medico has a solid financial basis. I think this is important to mention, and we have been able to establish it by asking people to become supporting members. They are not formally members, not members who are legally bound to Medico, but they committed themselves to give us donations for a long time. We have about 3,000 of them, and the number is increasing. This is a very important, if you like, fundraising tool. If you would like to use it, do it. Trying to get people to come to yourself. But you can only get them if they perceive your organization as an own project. So you have to present a profile which is providing some kind of identity, a distinctive identity. People are connected to Medico for a long time because they feel this is the right organization we would like to support. I leave out the history. This is just describing that we had a long learning process. We started in '68 as a humanitarian organization. We shifted over to a more political one when the Alma Ata Declaration was published, and everybody in the health community in the world, and even the people at Medico at the time, understood the interrelation between politics and health. This was a time when the revolution in Nicaragua took place, and we started to work alongside from liberation movements, but at the same time we started to tackle political issues. And this is quite important because at that time we had to change our work in the own public. It was necessary to start to explain the root causes of misery, the root causes of poverty and conflicts. It wasn't, we stopped just asking for donations at that moment. It was different. And we started to publish a book on the business of pharmaceutical companies. We called for a boycott of Shell, which at that moment was still funding and supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa. This, of course, you can imagine that these activities also led to conflicts with our government, with the economic and political power in Germany. But that must not be a problem. If you are able to control these conflicts, you can use them. You can use them as a mobilizing instrument, and we have done it at this moment. When we got hold of a letter of complaint of one of these companies sent to the Ministry of Cooperation in Germany, a person in the ministry, inside the ministry, sent a copy to us. We published it in a one-page ad in a newspaper and said, it's funny. The multinational shows impact. It's fine, but we are in the right way. So you can use it as an instrument. The third decade is the most important, when globalizing was a reality. The fall of the wall is just symbolizing it. We had to change our attitude again. It wasn't possible to support liberation movements any longer. We had to come with global networking at this moment to define a joint strategy, and these are the global social rights, and a joint entity which is able to fight for it, and this is the global public. And this is still in the process of making. It's not existing so far. We have only some ideas of it. And this is what I would like to talk about at the last minutes. I would very much like to give you some of our experience about in the context of NGO work as well. It is part of the Global Health Watch 4, and I have contributed to this section at this moment. And if I'm not possible to talk about this here, you have to buy this book and you have to go through this chapter at the very end. But just to tell you, NGOs are to some extent ambivalent. They are not only a gain of democracy, they are at the same time an expression of lacking democracy, because they are replacing what states have to do. NGOs are private actors, and as I said, nobody has the right to claim from an NGO an entitlement and due. It's not possible. Human rights are not, it's not possible to realize human rights by claiming assistance from NGOs. And this is the reason why we have to be very careful just to present NGOs as the best way to change the world. And we have to be aware that this kind of refeudalization, what I just described, is precisely the problem when it comes to charity, to Bill Gates, and all the celebrations in the media when states who are obliged to do something for their people can excuse themselves by saying this can be done by charity organization. And this is the case. So be careful on that. To make a difference, we NGOs, Medact, all of us, we can play a very important role in changing the world, but only if we are able to reflect our own role all the time. We have to consider what is the problem. And we have to deal with important threats. This is, one is being instrumentalized or co-optated by governments, in a sense I already described. And the other is being penetrated by what I call the managerial economics or managerialism, the business talk. And let me just speak two words on that. In the course of the globalization, the world has come closer but more divided than ever. And even the World Economic Forum in Davos had to accept that the risk for being socially excluded has increased in the last years. This comes along with an alarming loss of social cohesion and increasing violence. Politics started to react on that, but with security policy. There is a remarkable shift from development or social justice orientated policy towards security, and NGOs became part of it. We raised this problem at a conference, the first Frankfurt Conference on Aid, Rethinking the Power of Aid, in 2003, trying to discuss with our community how to avoid becoming just a part of crisis management. We would like to have more. It's not crisis management. We would like to go for change. But NGOs are, to some extent, forced into this kind of stabilizing the status quo. And if NGOs do not reflect this, they are lost. The second is defending utopian thinking against this kind of business talk or managerialization, as you may call it. We raised this issue during the second Frankfurt Conference on Aid, titled Beyond Aid, early this year, and Dave was part of it. He presented there. We had 600 people, participants, listening to that, and we discussed what is needed and how careful we should be in our own laws. It's amazing that organizations who are fighting for change are more and more coming up with the idea that programs have to be measurable, time-bound, and realistic. Yeah, what does it mean? Is it possible, if you are fighting a dictator, to be realistic? It could happen that you need 2 generations to get rid of him. Is it time-bound? If you have this criteria, it's always reducing your ambitions. And this is a problem for NGOs. They started to come up with small programs, tiny reforms, and this is measurable. It's of course measurable to provide food aid to refugees. It's very easy, we can do that. But how to change the situation of refugee camps politically can take you 2 generations. My first visit in the field was in the Western Sahara in 1981. The refugees are still living there in camps. Just to explain you, time-bound, realistic, and measurable in this context. So these are threats, these are traps where a lot of NGOs are stepping in without seeing it. And it's amazing how many NGOs are talking about investment and controlling mechanisms, about impact analysis and stakeholders instead of partners, political strategies and engagement. And a few of them have started to speak about return of investment instead of success. This is describing the problem. The last slide, okay. How to make change happen, of course. And as I said, the only chance we can see is to do everything to create a kind of countervailing power which is able to resist. We have a good understanding of rights, of regulation, and of the need of redistribution, and Ronald Labonte is quite often talking about the 3 R's. We added a 4th one, resistance, because this will only come about by a power which is able to stop this nonsense. And we have to do everything to work with our community, with everybody, to convince that we need this kind of public, and it has to be established transnationally. And as I said, it's not existing so far. We had a lot of meetings, and this is what our experience within the People's Health Movement is. We are sitting together, we are discussing the right to health, and there is a totally different understanding by all the people sitting at the table. And if we are discussing solidarity, there is no common understanding. So there is no common language so far. For the enemy, sorry for using this word, the other side, the multinationals, it's very easy. They have a common language, making profit. For us, it's very difficult to come up with an idea. So we have to work, we have to do work on that. And this is what we are doing together with the People's Health Movement, with a lot of different activities. I'm not able to explain them. And it's also necessary to do this in Germany. And I will end with mentioning this. We have started to establish a German platform for global health, like you are doing it. But it's a formal platform. It's not just networking, sitting together in a specific issue. We brought these people together from the trade unions, from, let me check, from the academia, from the professional organizations, from the social welfare institutions, the development community, from grassroots, from migrants group, from ATTAC. They are all sitting together 4 times a year. And we are discussing the idea of global health. And it's only at the start. Defining what does it mean, global health, is a tremendous problem. Just to give you one example. The fossil fuel energy production. IPPNW, which is part of our global platform, they demanded to have an immediate stop. And the trade unions, they protected, safeguarded the jobs. So this is a fundamental conflict, but if we don't raise these conflicts, if we don't start to discuss it within Germany, we will never find this kind of public, this consensus, which is needed to challenge the government and those who are doing it. So, but this is a long-term project, and it's a long-term project, and I have no idea how it will end. It's just to explain you, global governance, we need a change in that. Governance for health has failed, that's for sure. We can all observe it. It has to start at home, and it has to go back to the international side, and we have to go back to at home. This is the play we learned when we had this international campaign to ban landmines, where we did everything at the same time, working internationally, but trying to convince our government to come up with a decision which helped the other countries to come forward with their work in their countries. And this is what is not existing, what is in the process of making in the health context, and we have to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Thomas. I think it's always interesting to hear what other people are doing in other countries and how we're all facing similar problems. I'm very happy now to welcome Anuj Kapilashrami, who's come from Queen Margaret University and who's working in health, but specifically I think is going to talk to us about bridging activities between India and the UK as a result of research that she's been doing in a multi-country study. I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be speaking here, and thanks to Dave and the organizers of the Medact conference. I'm really delighted to be here. Now, the advantage of being the last speaker is that all the eloquent and knowledgeable speakers have said everything, so I could shut up and go back to the seat. But since I've come all the way from Edinburgh, I won't do that. But I do have a disclosure to make. Contrary to what the title of my talk may suggest, Bridging Divides, Academic and Social Activism, India and the UK Professionals and Communities, I do not have all the answers and solutions here, so I'll be raising a lot of questions. Damn, yes. So I'll just be adding to some of the questions that have been posed by the earlier speakers. The other disclosure and apology is that I do not have very elaborate and very visually appealing PowerPoint presentation. And that's partly due to I did have some very exciting photographs, but it's partly due to the technological error and my computer crashing that I lost some of the photographs. So unfortunately, I won't be able to show some of the Scotland mobilizing activities that we're doing there. And I will have to stick to my notes, so I'll be sticking to a script. What I would be doing in the next 20 minutes is sharing some of the critical reflections and my thoughts on my own journey from the worlds of activism and practice in India to a space that I currently occupy in the academia in the North. As a sociologist, and also have done my public health degree here in the London School, I want to adhere to the reflexive trend and actually reflect on and share my interdisciplinary background and experience, which really spans over 15 years, where I've engaged on health and development mainly from an equity perspective, from a range of perspectives. As a feminist and working on health and development in India, I engage social movements and wider civil society in advancing gender and health equity, both at the grassroots but also through policy advocacy and engagement. And subsequently, as an academic, I've brought this grassroots politics and activism politics into my work through critical scholarship that engages and examines the local and global interface in health policy and systems work. So I'm therefore very strongly rooted and committed to knowledge exchange between these very seemingly different worlds. Now, there are two key premises to my talk, and first there is the academic and the activist worlds are perceived as two very different worlds, and there is a perceived fault line between these, which I feel is developed through a series of assumptions and widespread beliefs on key dichotomies, and dichotomies such as thinking and doing, knowledge and practice, reason, emotion, an ivory tower, and the messy real world of practice. The essence being that academics think and activists act or simply criticize, as though without thinking. Now, feminists have had a long-standing engagement with this debate, and many also have challenged the dichotomies that serve as the basis of this division. In doing so, they have reconceptualized what knowledge is, what politics is, and also who can be knowers and who are political subjects. So there are several work that is also critiquing the reductionist understandings of activism and citizens. In my work, I draw on that rich tradition to problematize and bridge the gap between the two seemingly different worlds in the field of global health and more broadly development. Now, second premise is that this fault line or the division is problematic and should be challenged. In order to achieve this, however, I argue it is important that we first understand what processes and acts of divisions are creating these and deepening the divides between the two constituencies. And a constellation of factors can be identified here, which undermine the endeavor for transformative and social and political change. And I won't be able to sum up all of these, but just touch upon three or four major schisms that are defining these fault lines. So first is the growing commercialization of knowledge in the current educational establishment, as trends in university funding and management and control by funding councils have dramatically weakened academic independence. There is growing uncertainty of contractual employment. There are zero-hour contracts that all the speakers have referred to. There are administrative burdens, and alongside, there is an increasing pressure to produce high-impact research outputs only to secure funding and jobs. Now, this clearly leads to a bias in the kinds of academic research and knowledge exchange activities one engages in, and also how knowledge is packaged and disseminated is extremely problematic. Now, as this audience will recognize, unless activities can be presented as high-impact, refable outputs that attract funding, they're not valued by academic enterprises. And this has been a constant battle in undertaking following some of the political projects in this context. We also see that many research networks are becoming increasingly exclusive and elite. A recent call for Health Systems Research Conference costed £744 for attendance. we clearly need to reject these and restructure academic institutions and academic life to prevent further marginalization of teaching. A second development is how knowledge has been monopolized by academic and knowledge exchange networks, which are entrenched in these hierarchies, giving rise to uncritical voices often reinventing the wheel. Now, such monopolies of knowledge gradually suppress any alternative ways of thinking, capture the debates, and tend to be apolitical and often out of touch with the social political realities. Now, the experience of recent Lancet Oslo Commission, the Convention on Global Health Governance, and also the Lancet series on universal health coverage that emerged from India were embroiled in politics and exemplify the watered down and depoliticized solutions that academic institutions are often endorsing despite nuanced analysis of, quote unquote, the problem. Third, the fault lines are also defined along geographical lines. Now, in particular, where knowledge exchange efforts have resulted in low middle income countries being passive recipients of knowledge generated in the high income country contexts, even when it is their reality that is in the focus. And while the sites of knowledge generation are changing to some extent, especially in the field of health policy and systems research, collaborations continue to be dominated by elite networks in the global south and the north. So it is the same people who occupy these different networks, and several voices marginalized. Finally, the division is also defined and reinforced by scholars and activists' tenuous relationship with policymakers. Now, here one of the key problems is that while most public health researchers seem comfortable with the idea that health research ought to, at some level, be able to generate ideas for change in policy and or practice, the idea of advocacy or activism per se is beyond the reductionist epistemology of that underscores most public health enterprise, since it requires engaging in a political debate which may be regarded also as subjective. A second problem with academics and activists' relationship with policymakers is with the nature of evidence itself that is considered in these policy debates. Now, the quest for what works to address health inequalities in the very topical issue in the current context of the UK government prioritizes evidence generated by trials and systematic reviews, primarily in terms of its ability to make causal inference about primary outcomes. So even though there's a lot of very progressive policy statements and commitments from the Scottish government on health inequalities, they tend to disprivilege qualitative insights and lived realities of how, for example, disenfranchised people experience stigma in public services, and other ethical and interactional dimensions of care, making context, process, and social structures which are reproducing inequalities incidental to outcomes of downstream behavioral interventions. Now, the environment is changing, so there is some hope, and there's growing emphasis on people-centeredness of health systems. And the new public health agenda is increasingly focused on community-based frameworks to affect underlying determinants of health inequalities. There's, of course, greater emphasis on participation, inclusive dialogue for decision-making, and that has implied a resurgence of interests in communities. Yet participation has often ended up as implying drawing communities to identify needs or validate existing research findings, and precludes any engagement in communities defining solutions for themselves and implementing these. Now, having described the contemporary context within which these divisions occur and those that reinforce power asymmetries within and between academia or professionals and activist worlds, what I would like to now draw on is my own engagement with the People's Health Movement to offer some useful insights into ways that can effectively bridge this divide. Some of the speakers have already introduced the People's Health Movement and also the significance of the year 2000, which most of you will be familiar with, in the history of the People's Health Movement, as it brought several health activists, networks from different countries to the first People's Health Assembly in Bangladesh. Now, it's important to realize that the Health Assembly was not simply a conference. It was a culmination of over a year of grassroots mobilization and community organizing around key health priorities and entitlements. I've been involved with the PHM since its inception and was part of identifying through community conversations those local priorities, which distilled into the People's Health Charter, which was endorsed at the Health Assembly. Now, since the PHM has expanded in its outreach, both in geographical terms, it's present in 70 countries, very active in many, as well as its impact on local and global issues. For example, the whole experience of Commission for Social Determinants in Health, which the PHM was also able to affect. Now, similar to the feminist movement, the health movement has also created alternative sites of knowledge productions. For example, through the Global Health Watch and also through the International People's Health Universities, they have aimed to bridge the gap between universities, activists, and practitioners. Now, the UK PHM is part of this growing movement, and some of the PHM members are present in the audience. Mirroring the third Global People's Health Assembly in Cape Town in 2012, we organized and participated in our first People's Health Assembly in the Nottingham University to discuss the continued development of a progressive health movement in the UK at a time of extreme fiscal and ideological attack on the public sector. Now, the Assembly was key to re-energize participating health practitioners and academics to take action against key threats shaping the health crisis in the UK. And it also offered a very robust analysis of social, political, economic, and environmental factors affecting health. However, for me, most significant was the resolve to ground this learning in grassroots experiences and gain a region and context-specific understanding of the health issues that are affecting local populations. And this commitment is what underpinned subsequent efforts of mobilizing groups, engaging them to jointly devise a local program of action for a progressive health movement. And this process has shaped very differently across the different regions in the UK. I can only share the Scotland example as I've been very instrumentally involved with it. In Scotland, through an open meeting post-Nottingham, we formed a loose coordinating group and generated consensus on the need for widening our base to consulting more groups, disadvantaged populations, and to just understand how austerity and the whole agenda has played out very differently in England, in Scotland and Wales. The time and resource commitment this demanded was really challenging, as we would all know. And we were also confined by the academic and other institutional structures and their demands placed on us. I therefore led a participatory action research with support from a small grant to engage third sector health and social care organizations and individuals on lived experiences of health and well-being. Now, the methodology of participatory action research, and is really emancipatory, and it enables linking groups to an emergent health movement, and in the process also identifying those key priorities for communities in Scotland. As the action research progressed, communities of inquiry and action evolved in order to address issues that were significant for those participating. Both communities of place as well as communities of identity were drawn into this process. So there were consultations with health and well-being projects in Glasgow, in Ayrshire, in parts of Aberdeen, as well as communities of identity who were particularly working with refugees and asylum seekers, or women from the black and minority ethnic communities, as well as people with mental health problems and those using drugs were consulted. And people's narratives were sought through consultation and interviews with almost 14 health networks and community initiatives in 7 different Scottish local authorities, public meetings which were followed by drop-in storytelling sessions, group discussions with women from BME communities, and community conversations that were also held at ongoing and existing forums such as the Edinburgh World Justice Festival, among others. Now, these qualitative insights really improved our the Scotland's group's collective understanding of issues, issues such as extreme social isolation, emergence of new vulnerable groups such as young unemployed youth were key insights resulting from this process, and also revealed community struggles on access to health and welfare services in Scotland in a climate of austerity. What it also did was generate enthusiasm among participants to link them with and bring their issues and strategies to a wider forum. A key catalyst, of course, in this process of organising was the Scottish referendum, which, despite its disappointing results, has facilitated collectivism and a sense of camaraderie in bringing about change. Now, this enthusiasm was visible in the 2.5 days of the second UK People's Health Assembly, which the UK group decided will be hosted in Scotland. And that served clearly as a very useful rallying point to consolidate issues and provide a platform for all to advance collective action on health equity and its determinants. Now, hosting the two assemblies in academic institutions, one the Nottingham University and the other Queen Margaret University, with funding support from the trade unions, was both symbolic and strategic, making university sites of political action and enhancing their relationship with the communities that they existed in. By encouraging speakers as well as organizers to pay the nominal fees, we subsidized participation of and offered additional support to particularly disadvantaged groups, such as the refugees and asylum seekers and those who were on benefits. The assembly drew 120 participants, individuals and representatives of 32 third sector organizations, including environmental groups, health and social activists, organizations working as individuals working as carers, as well as 10 academic institutions, as well as a very healthy participation from the NHS, both doctors as well as health workers and policymakers. This was across the UK, but with very strong representation of groups that were local to Scotland. Now, with a focus on building a progressive movement in a time of austerity and social exclusion, we heard analysis of health effects of poverty and austerity-led changes, which, according to the structure of the assembly, were built incrementally through very powerful storytelling and testimonies that were shared, discussion on underlying causes, and subsequently inspiring community-level strategies to address these. So on one hand, we heard of experiences of those living in benefits, how the austerity measures were impacting on their health and well-being. We heard testimonies, very powerful testimonies from families against corporate killers who shared the experience of deaths and personal tragedies as a result of extremely poor occupational hazards. And we also heard inspiring strategies from Street Soccer Scotland and from several groups who were working at the grassroots with extremely innovative solutions. Now, participants concluded by endorsing a call to action, which was informed by a very collective brainstorming on action plan for campaigns. So what can activists do? What can we take back to our communities? And also future strategies for a larger movement and the role of academics. It was important to maintain this high momentum, as one participant expressed, that was generated through the assembly. And that's where the learning from communities of geography made a substantive contribution. So within the Health Assembly, there was sharing of people from People's Health Movement in South Africa, in South America, from India, who shared experiences, innovative mechanisms that had been used to evoke accountabilities, to strengthen health systems, and to realize the right to health. And the successful experience of developing, for instance, the People's Health Manifesto in India, as well as organizing citizens' tribunals that I have been involved with, and some of the speakers at the People's Health Assembly shared more on, clearly led to and informed our local level strategies. Now, this exchange also demonstrated the vital importance of the indivisible links between the local and the global in authentic grassroots activism for people-centered health. A consultative process of drafting a manifesto is currently underway. The demands generated from prior consultations through the participatory action research were then presented and put forward as an online survey, and also informed the People's Health Movement's submission to the Smith Commission around the discussions on devolution, which was made on 30th October. There have been several structural and other constraints that we've been grappling in the process. So, of course, it's not all rosy, and there are key structural challenges that we need to address through this process. And one that many of the participants have already alluded to is the politics of language, of what language health inequalities researchers or academics use to reach out to communities, how that language excludes people. It's heartening to see sign language here, but I mean, in the hierarchy of access to language, people with different disabilities really do not fare well. A second challenge was who is the community and how inclusive are third sector organizations as gateways to reaching these communities? How could the most hard to reach groups be drawn into this collective struggle? It was important to reconceptualize, along with those communities, the categories with which health inequalities work has been undertaken. So clearly the results of the work that we undertook and the consultations we undertook, there was a need for challenging categories beyond the areas of deprivation. There were far more intersectional vulnerabilities that had to be addressed in tackling health inequalities. Third was, how do we ensure involvement of academic activists do not hegemonize the process and outcome of such organizing? And a classic example has been the sort of differences in the generation of findings from grassroots consultations as opposed to putting it out as an online survey, which were responded by a big majority of academics and the NHS policy makers. Okay, yeah, I'll be just concluding now. And I can share that in the discussions. The final threat is also the climate of austerity. The funding cuts have most severely affected these processes, as third sector organizations, community groups have experienced most dramatic cuts to their project and core funding, despite growing pressures resulting from the withdrawal of the public sector. In such climate of uncertainty, the enthusiasm and momentum cannot be translated to time commitments and the social and political action. Nevertheless, forums such as PHM, Medact are really important and even transformative as umbrella organizations that can bring and bridge these different worlds together. The experience of movement building in Scotland tells us that this divide can be bridged through greater dialectical engagement among activists and academics, as well as political and substantive collaborations on issues of interest. However, bridging the activist-academic divide in itself is insufficient to ensure social change in meaningful terms. And in order to break the monopolies of knowledge, we must be critical of our own biases and develop a strategic awareness of the political economy of knowledge creation within our institutions. This can be done by both unraveling the dominant economic development models, assumptions of neoliberalism, but also critically examining their truths or untruths, and most important, challenge the ways in which and the mechanisms by which these truths and untruths are being produced. Now, equally important is building new structures for policies and practice that are grounded in specific situations of people. We've been talking about those emancipatory testimonies and people's stories, and that support the emergence of theory from the ground of diverse lived realities, rather than forcing these realities to fit into rigid theories. And with that, I would like to conclude that such radical unpacking of the political economy of health and the forces that drive development along its present directions is essential for transformative and radical change. It is a political project, and this, I argue, is everybody's business. Thank you.
I know.
We're going to extend this just by another 10 or 15 minutes, and we know that lunch is sandwiches, so you can take them into your workshops when they begin. We would like the workshops to start at 2. We've run a little bit late this morning, but it seems like an opportunity to be able now to talk to and ask questions of our 3 speakers. So, do we have anybody got any burning questions? Yes.
Hello, my name's Kiva. This is really a question for Mary. I was wondering that you were talking about when you were going around the UK and speaking to these people, and you said that they were just normal people and they had families, and they weren't necessarily the people who were going to protests or anti-austerity marches. And I was just wondering, do you think it's possible to mobilise those people and to get them out onto the streets, and what do you think it would take?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that a lot of people brought up to me was that they felt that there would be social unrest in the future because...
Microphone, please.
Is it on? that working?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell from. I never normally get told to hold the microphone closer to me. It's usually the other way around. Yeah, so a lot of people I spoke to felt that there would be social unrest. A lot of people spontaneously mentioned the London riots, for instance, as something that was an indicator that was under-analysed. The thing that is really striking is that the people who are most affected are often the least able to find even a minute in their own day just to scrabble around for whatever few pennies they can get. I mean, if you go visit food banks, the people queuing up outside them, often they're collecting food for older people that live in their communities as well. So their form of activism is very different. It's very community-based. But I was talking to a friend of mine up there who was just saying that there's a fatigue about it. And this is, in many ways, that conspires against the kind of social movements that are actually needed to challenge this, because people have been, it's been an assault. I mean, austerity has been an economic and social assault on people, and they're weary. Now, there are lots of sort of smaller groups of people who are getting together and standing up and saying things. It's very, very hard to foresee, without, say, a coordinated trade union movement right across the country, for that to happen. So whilst that's a kind of negative response to your question, I did sense enough anger and enough discontent to suggest that, this can only go on for so long, which is why I ended with the quote from the woman from Croxteth, because it really did echo what a lot of people